Good afternoon again, everyone. Welcome to the second session, Conflicts, Covert Dynamics and Security in Afghanistan, Regional Challenges and Indian Perspectives. I'm Mitali Dhaka, researcher at Indic Researchers Forum and your host for this session. Today, we have Ms. Levsa Bayankhail with us, who will be chairing this session. Levsa Bayankhail is an Afghan political commentator and security researcher. She's convener of the Pashtun Security Dialogue at the Indic Researchers Forum, where she contributes to research and policy discussions on regional security, Pashtun rights, and cross-border rights issues. She's also actively involved in Pashtun Tahafuz Movement advocacy in Europe, having held roles within PTM Europe and an international advocacy committee. Through public engagement, writing, and activism, she highlights enforced disappearances, civilian rights, and the non-violent struggle of Pashtuns. I would now like to take a moment to introduce our esteemed speakers for this session. Please welcome again Harjit Sandhu. Harjit Sandhu is a retired senior Interpol service officer who served as police chief in insurgency-affected areas of Manipur, commanded a Manipur Rifles battalion, and handled high-profile cases with the Central Bureau of Investigation. He also held senior international assignments with Interpol and the United Nations Security Council, including as coordinator and spokesperson for UN sanctions panels on arms trafficking and conflict financing. As a recognized expert in financial crimes and counter-terrorism, he has advised UN bodies and co-authored a widely used report on hawala and money laundering with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Secondly, we will Brigadier Kuldeep Singh. Brigadier Kuldeep Singh is a seasoned professional with 46 years of experience in strategic assessment, disaster risk management, climate adaptation, and intelligence handling. Having served in the Indian Army from lieutenant to brigadier, he held key positions in regimental, staff, and technical appointments. As Director of Intelligence Coordination, he was instrumental in establishing India's Defense Intelligence Agency. Brigadier Singh served as Principal Director of Defense in the National Security Council Secretariat for a decade and was also the first Indian Army officer to be posted at DRDO CVRDE for national projects like MBT Arjun and the Integrated Guided Missile Development Program. His extensive international experience and expertise in defense, security, and geopolitical matters have made him a highly respected leader. Thirdly, we have Sangar Pekar sir with us, who have also shared his very important views so far. Sangar Pekar is an Afghan journalist and political analyst focusing on Afghanistan's conflict dynamics, governance, and regional geopolitics. He is closely associated with the Afghan Eye, where he contributes analysis and serves as a prominent voice through its podcast and editorial work. Known for blending ground-level insight with strategic commentary, he is regarded as an influential Afghan media voice. Next, we have Ambassador Amar Sinha. Amar Sinha is a retired Indian Foreign Service officer with a 35-year diplomatic career who served as Secretary of Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs until 2017. He also held senior overseas postings, including Ambassador to Tajikistan from 2007 to 2010 and Ambassador to Afghanistan from 2013 to 16. And have also earlier served in Washington, D.C., Jakarta, Brussels, Buenos Aires, and Algiers. In New Delhi, he handled trade policy in WTO negotiations and oversaw India's engagement with major multilateral forums such as BRICS and G20. He was also a member of the National Security Advisory Board. Post-retirement, he is a distinguished fellow at the Research Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, and advises on strategic and economic issues. Before I hand over the floor to Ms. Bayankhail, I request the audience to kindly turn off your microphone and post the questions in the chat box, which shall be taken up during the Q&A session. With this, I kindly request Ms. Levsa to take over.
Good morning to all distinguished speakers and panelists and participants. Thank you, Mitali. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this session on the conflict cover dynamic and security in Afghanistan. Regional challenges in Indian perspective. Even though Afghanistan today is in the headline for conflict with Pakistan, however, most of news headlines today tend to ignore the deeper roots of the security crisis in the region. This session focused on evolving nature of the conflict in Afghanistan, where open military actions, covert operation, criminal network increasingly overlap. These dynamics are shaping volatile security environment that extends well beyond Afghanistan's borders. One of the key issues we will discuss is the recent Pakistan airstrikes in Kabul and in the war between Afghanistan and Pakistan. These are not isolated even by of uh, of a war. This is not isolated even of, but even but these are not isolated event, but part of a longer patterns. The Pakistani barbaric action against Afghan civilians has further abused the human rights and violated Duran line. Afghanistan reserves the rights through military action to defend its territorial sovereignty against Pakistan aggression. Another major concern is growing link between narco-terrorism and organized crime in the Pakistan-Afghanistan region. Drug trafficking networks and militant groups continue to reinforce each other, creating sources of funding and influence group that continues that weaken the state control. These networks have directly security implications for both India and Afghanistan. From cross-border crime to financing of extremist activity, this dimension of the conflict often receives limited attention despite its long-term impact. We are privileged to have an expert panel with vast experience in international security, intelligence, and politics to discuss this relevant topic of session. This session will also examine intelligence architecture of Afghan conflict. Afghanistan has long been shaped by intelligence competition, proxy warfare, and covert influence by multiple actors. Looking at how intelligence success and failure have influenced outcomes in Afghanistan can offer valuable lessons for India's own security planning and regional engagement. Finally, we will reflect on Delhi-Kabul security cooperation, both in the past and in the current context. As regional situation evolves, it's time for building new strategic partnership to not only mitigate mutual security challenges, but to aim for a safer future of our generation. The aspiration for security should not only be limited to territorial sovereignty, but to extend to human rights security. This session aimed to encourage clear thinking, grounded analysis, and open discussion. I look forward to a meaningful exchange of ideas and invite our speakers. First, we have Mr. Harjit Sandhu to speak on the topic narco-terror and organized crime in Pak-Afghan region. Security concern for India. It's over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Levsa, for introducing the subject, and to Indic Researchers for giving me this opportunity to speak to that. This is a subject on which we all can speak for hours together, but I will try to confine myself within the time limit of 15 minutes. And if you feel my voice is little tired because this week have been very, very hectic, was doing some high profile investigation where I had to speak to so many interviews, so my throat is little tired because of this. Weekend was supposed to be for rest, but this is Saturday early morning. Anyway, thank you very much. So coming to the subject, when we discuss national security, we usually think of missiles, borders, and conventional warfare. But increasingly, wars are funded not by taxation, but by narcotics. Every kilogram of heroin or methamphetamine, what we call meth in short, that crosses a border can fund a rifle, a recruitment drive, or an improvised explosive device, what we call IEDs. And in India's immediate neighborhood, especially in Pakistan-Afghanistan region, drugs are not just a criminal issue, they are part of a conflict economy. The word, this narco-terrorism, it refers to the nexus where Drug trafficking finances and facilitates terrorist activity, and organized crime provides logistics. Extremist groups provide protection. Together, they create a mutually reinforcing ecosystem. For India, this is not a distant problem. It is a live, evolving security challenge. And geographically, India is sandwiched between Golden Triangle, that is Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and the Golden Crescent. In this dialogue, we focus only on the Golden Crescent part. What is the strategic context of this Golden Crescent for India's security? The Afghanistan-Pakistan region has historically been central to the Golden Crescent drug economy, with spillovers that directly affect India. And why this region matters for us? Historically, Afghanistan has been one of the world's largest producers of illicit opium. According to United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, their statistics, opium poppy cultivation in 2022 was 232,000 hectares. But when the Taliban, what we call 2.0 came, then the cultivation decreased. It became only 12,800 in 2024, and 2025 it became even less. It is now 10,200 hectares as per the figures of the UNODC. Now, while cultivation dropped sharply after the Taliban ban, the trafficking networks did not disappear. Instead, the prices increased, the stockpiles were monetized, and methamphetamine production expanded. So, this is critical. The system adapts faster than the policy responses and faster than the law enforcement responses. Now, how this narco-terror pipeline works in this region, we have to see the problem in 4 steps. First is production or sourcing. The opiates, where opium is converted to morphine or heroin, that historically is anchored in Afghanistan and this region. Then synthetics, methamphetamine type drugs, they can be produced with precursor chemicals and small labs, making the suppression harder over time. I know a long time back when I used to be for this anti-narcotics team of CBI for 2 years, I was also there before moving to anti-corruption. There was a big problem of acetic anhydride going from India to Pakistan and then further going and then the drugs, heroin used to come back. So that is a problem that stays still even now. Then the second step after production comes the protection and taxation. Armed actors, insurgent terror groups, local militias, criminal enforcers, they provide protection, turning drugs into conflict commodity. Then third, logistics networks. Organized crime acts as a backbone. The smuggling requires transporters, safe houses, corrupt facilitators, document fraud, hawala, informal finance, and cross-border links. So that organized crime provides it. The fourth, laundering and conversion. The proceeds move via cash couriers, hawala, trade-based money laundering, front businesses, and increasingly digital channels these days. Then that can be repurposed for weapons, propaganda, recruitment. So this is not a linear chain from one to, it is a networked enterprise. What in criminal law we say joint criminal enterprise, where everybody is connected with somebody. And here is the danger. The system feeds itself. Terror groups protect the routes. Protected routes increase trafficking. Increased trafficking generates more funding, and that funding strengthens the terror network. This is how it works. And what are the routes and modalities that affect directly India? The first we take land border pressure, Punjab and J&K sector. The smuggling methods over time have evolved from tunnels and couriers to drone drops. This is a big challenge now. Why drones matter for us? Because no human infiltration is required. So gone are the times. I come from a border state Punjab, and our village, even when in my childhood, I remember we knew who is Blackia, they used to call it, like smuggler. We knew that that person at night was disappearing from village when we were small boys, and he was crossing over to through the border and bringing drugs. That time, I'm talking of my childhood. So now why drones matter? Because that no human infiltration now is required. And small but high level payloads can be dropped, and it is harder attribution. You can't attribute to who has brought the drug. So whom do we seize? Do we arrest the drone? We can shoot it down, but to whom we attribute, that is a very, very big problem. Then gray zone deniability. Just to expand this term, gray zone deniability refers to a strategy in international relations and security where a country or actor conducts hostile, coercive, or destabilizing activities below the threshold of open war, while maintaining plausible deniability to avoid direct retaliation or escalation into war. And for security forces, this really creates a tactical detection challenge, attribution complexity, and rapid response pressure. I used to have a QRT, quick reaction team, when we were in Manipur, but for drone, what will your quick reaction team do? You are not having any person to chase. Then maritime routes. So other than this land, Punjab and J&K, maritime routes, Arabian Sea, Gujarat, Konkan region, bulk consignments have been coming, which they depart from Makran coast. Those who are familiar, I think all of us on this forum are familiar with that region. It is the southern coastal region of Balochistan and stretches to about 1,000 kilometers along the Gulf of Oman, covering Pakistan and Afghanistan region. This was also an ancient maritime trade as far back as 2500 BC, and it continued even later also. Then second is using mid-sea transfers. So the drugs are transferred mid-sea, and sometimes in the area which is not under any country's zone. Third, they exploit porous maritime monitoring. Even when India is not the final destination, regional maritime trafficking strengthens the broader narco-terror ecosystem. We saw a few years back, there was a big consignment at Gujarat coast that I think we read in the news, 3,000 kilos or something. I'm not going into details of that case, which I know, but just moving on to the next one. The specific security concerns for India out of this are, one is terror financing. The drug money lowers the cost of sustaining extremist networks. Even the limited funding sustains recruitment. It supports sleeper cells. It funds logistics. Then the second concern is internal security destabilization. Narcotics weaken society from within. When with this addiction crisis comes up, youth vulnerability and criminal recruitment pools. Those who know Punjab, there is hardly any village where you don't have the youth who are addicted to the drugs. There is hardly anyone not addicted to that in the villages when we go. Then third comes organized crime penetration. When crime networks grow wealthy because of the funds coming from drugs and other criminal activities, these crime networks, when they grow wealthy, they corrupt the officials from every department. I'm not singling out any. They corrupt the officials with that money. They influence local governments. They distort elections. And they create parallel power structures. I can list a few more, but I will stop at that. This is where crime transitions into national security. Then third comes gray zone warfare. Narco trafficking can function as indirect coercion because of there is plausible deniability, there is slow burn destabilization, and it is hard to prove sponsorship. It becomes a tool below the threshold of open conflict, where narco-trafficking can become a tool of societal destabilization at a larger level, a slow burn society threat, and not just a crime problem. Now, final part, what should India do? What are the actionable policy points for India to take up on this? First is border technology dominance. It's very important. Deny the routes to border and coast. How can that be done? Have this counter-US detection, radar, jamming protocols, rapid response teams, forensic exploitation of the drones, which we recover, forensically examine where it comes from and what linking that. Then harden vulnerable stretches with layered surveillance, ground sensors, thermal, AI-assisted analytics, then rapid neutralization inputs. Then second one, first was border technology dominance. We have to dominate that. Second, which is most important according to me, because I used to be heading financial crime and high-tech team in the Interpol. So I focus on that. Financial warfare, follow the money. This is the highest leverage. That is the most decisive front is financial in fighting narco-terrorism. After 9/11, I was invited to speak various forums and even was invited to testify before House Finance Subcommittee of US Senate on how these people financed it, and was also talked to by the 9/11 Commission. So my focus to them was, we only talk of fighting terrorism militarily, whereas fighting terrorism financial is not less important, rather it is more important. Because if a criminal knows that cannot use that money, cannot enjoy, then will have less motivation to make more money. So for financial warfare, what I suggest is we have aggressive anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism enforcement. Very clear. Hawala disruption. Hawala is, they say, very solid, but it can be very easily disrupted, fragile. I did it 4 decades back on Manipur border and crossed over to the other side, but that case itself will take hours to discuss. Trade-based money laundering audits should be done. Asset forfeiture is very important. If the assets are forfeited, I know India's NDPS Act with the amendment covered that, so that is very good. So following the money often dismantles the networks much faster than chasing the consignments. Then break the organized crime ecosystem. Improve interagency fusion and coordination. NCB, intelligence, customs, ED, FIU, state police. There must be some mechanism. I'm not saying Homeland Security type like in US, but some agency which coordinates all of these people so that they don't only operate in their silos. There must be some coordination between them. Reduce demand and social harm. That is also very important. That is called social resilience. National security is incomplete without drug rehabilitation, without youth employment initiatives, without community intelligence networks. Demand reduction equals vulnerability reduction. And as a concluding statement, I will conclude with 3 key propositions. First, narco-terror is not merely a law and order issue, it is a hybrid security threat. Second, organized crime and extremist networks increasingly overlap, creating resilient, adaptive systems. Third, India's response must be equally networked. That includes technology at borders, financial disruption at core, maritime vigilance, and social resilience. If terror is the visible flame, narcotics are often the invisible fuel. India's security challenge in the Pakistan-Afghanistan region is not only about stopping drugs. It is about dismantling an ecosystem where crime finances conflict and conflict protects crime. Thank you very much for the time. And I'm ready to respond to any questions that comes now or later. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful presentation and your experience with respect to terror financing and narcotics has greatly contributed to this session. Hopefully, we will hear more from you in the question and answer session. So thank you. Next, we have Brigadier Kuldeep Singh, who is going to speak on a very topic, understanding the intelligent architecture of the Afghan conflict. Lesson for India. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. First, may I be allowed to ask a question to Harjit sir? I know him from my days in the National Security Council, and it's always such a pleasure and a privilege to hear him speak. So, one of the main things has also been smuggling, through Mary and all that into Russia, drug smuggling.
Yeah.
I mean, as you're well aware, sir, Russia is one of the countries which is very badly affected by drugs, and So, what is happening over there? Any idea, sir?
I think then we will divert from this region, but definitely Russia has been there. If I'm allowed, I think Ambassador Amar Sinha is there, so it's not that against any diplomats. But when I was in narcotics in CBI for 2 years, we got information that one diplomat was carrying the drugs in the diplomatic bag to the region which Brigadier you are mentioning. But then I was not allowed because that would have that time become a big diplomatic scene if we had not recovered the drug. And at that time, the individual had traveled from Pakistan to New Delhi, and our information was that from New Delhi he was to fly to Moscow and take the drug. I'm talking of old time. So there are, of course, since we are concentrating on this golden crescent in this, what you are saying is we can always cover that subject subsequently, but definitely it's a pleasure to see you here. I was preparing to listen to you, and you put it back on me. I think let us go with the subject. But there are so many things. I tell you, even BSF people's involvement. I have seen even that border with Myanmar got the full battalion transferred after that undercover operation where I went across the border. And Russia is no exception. I think this whole belt, if Taliban says reduce the poppy cultivation, it does not reduce the drug. They shift to another one. And definitely Russia is no exception to that. I think I will leave Russia for the time being deliberately out of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, good morning, everyone, once again, or good afternoon. So I will just browse through my presentation, which is there. I wonder if you can see that.
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay. Now, I will just first dwell upon a bit about the background of the Afghanistan and the great game which was played. I am very sure that everybody is very familiar with this, but just a couple of points I want to make in this context before I come to 6 points in the intelligence context. The first one is Afghanistan's geostrategic location. You're well aware of that. The next is that mountains divide communities, and this division stands aggravated even today by a lack of a very robust inland transportation system. Hence, we are well aware that Afghanistan has rarely been integrated into a homogeneous, completely integrated nation. You have Tajiks with ties to Tajikistan, Uzbeks with ties to Uzbekistan, Pashtuns astride the Durand line which separates Afghanistan and Pakistan. We have pro-Anarian Hazaras, etc. and all that. And to its east is a neighbor, Pakistan, which is also fractious and comprises Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, KPP, FATA, and PATA. And with some of its communities, especially the Baluch and the Pashtuns, continue to harbor autonomous tendencies. And that is point 2. Point 3, you are well aware of the origins of the Durand Line and how even today it's a source of tensions and problems. And that even pre-47, there was an idea of Pashtunistan, which is also responsible for what is happening today. And the role that was played by the frontier Gandhi, that is Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who founded the Khudai Khidmatkar movement, and how the partition split Pashtuns between astride the Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And since then, despite ethnic, linguistic, and religious commonalities, both majority Sunni nations, Pakistan and Afghanistan, their relations stand characterized by mutual mistrust and animosity. And how, after pre-47, post-1947, there have been massive efforts to divert ethno-nationalism as also to exploit it. Pakistan has tried to divert it, to take the attention away of the idea of Pashtunistan, whereas countries like the USA, etc., has sought to exploit it. So now I come to the 6 points that I'll be making. The first is how Afghanistan became a ground for competition between various state intelligence agencies during the Cold War and the CIA, ISI, MI6 coordination during the Afghan Jihad. This was the intense phase of Cold War. That's a period between December 1979 to 1989. There's tremendous competition going on for resources, allies, and hegemony. And it's at this juncture, after USSR invaded Afghanistan and lent support to a pre-communist government, that these USS CIA and Saudi General Intelligence Agency and China together bankrolled the jihad in Afghanistan in the form of Operation Cyclone. Pakistan's ISI had a massive role and a primacy on the ground in this Operation Cyclone. They enrolled Pashtuns in large numbers as Mujahideen, trained them in New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, radicalized them at New York's Al-Kifa Refugee Center, which is also called the Brooklyn Jihad Office, armed them, flew them back, inducted them into Pakistan with the help of the ISI. And around 1984 to around astride 1980-84, you had this Palestinian religious scholar, Sheikh Abdullah Azam, established the Maktab al-Khidmat, or the MAK, astride the Pak-Afghan border, which later was said to be the precursor of the Al-Qaeda. Now, Osama bin Laden reached AfPak in early 1980s to assist the Mujahideen with the support of the ISI and the US and Saudi Arabia. Abdullah Azam convinced OBL to join MAK, and by 1986, MAK had branches in over 30 US cities, and they're collecting donations to support the jihad. Islamic Center of Tucson, Arizona, was the first, is later on labeled as the first cell of Al-Qaeda in the USA. Now, funding for fighting and services in Afghanistan was canalized through two main banks in Saudi Arabia, the International Islamic Relief Organization, IRO, and the IRA. Both functioned under the umbrella of the World Islamic League. Now, after the Soviet withdrawal in February 1989, President Najibullah's regime fell, and you are well aware what happened after that. The 7 Mujahideen parties took over, and after that they were deemed, parties were deemed, corrupt, inefficient, and anti-Pashtun. And we had the rise of the Taliban under Mullah Muhammad Omar in a land that had witnessed immense foreign funding, influx of a huge number of weapons, training of mujahideen, and now the residue of the trained manpower was still there, who did not know what to do with the training that they received. They just could not, abandon their guns and turn them into plowshares. And also the establishment of support agencies, which was still there, as also the work being done by the ISI, which continued. Now, this laid the groundwork for the rise of Al-Qaeda also. Now, just around this period, as in 1988, the meetings were going on between the USSR and this thing about a withdrawal from Afghanistan, Pakistan's ISI and the other establishment, they imbibed two major lessons. One was that low-cost, irregular warfare by religiously inspired zealots can defeat even a superpower. You don't really have to fight a full-fledged war. You can use them and ensure that even a superpower expends, inordinate amount of resources in terms of money, etc., to fight them, and thereby, debilitate itself. The second major lesson it learned was that nuclear-armed neighbors do not fight directly, but do so through proxies. And hence it began sponsoring terrorism in India. And this coincided with Pakistan attaining nuclear capability. That is towards the end of 1980s and just around the start of 1990s. This was the worst period. Now, we come down to the CIA, ISI, MI6 coordination in the form of Operation Cyclone. Perhaps the largest covert operation in the CIA's history in scale. The CIA provided finance, which was over $20 billion in those days. They also provided high-end military hardware in the form of Stinger manpads, etc., and all that. They also provided a huge amount of tech intel. Now, MI6 provided advanced training in urban sabotage, psychological operations. They also shared their knowledge that they had, acquired over, hundreds of years of their stay in this region, including during the Anglo-Afghan War. I mean, they had very deep knowledge of the culture, the terrain, etc., which they shared and was then leveraged. The ISI assisted in recruiting potential mujahideen, their post-training infiltration and exfiltration, the arming, rearming, logistic support networks, and they served as apex logistic hubs and were the sole arbitrator of which mujahideen faction or factions got what and when. And this Operation Cyclone was an excellent intelligence operational model. It had a cutout system. The CIA had no direct contact with the so-called rebels, except those which had flew down, to New York, then to Washington, and then to the firing ranges, and this thing. And there was plausible deniability. Although what was going on, like I mentioned, that flying in of the mujahideen, the training, their stay at that Al-Kifa, refugee center or the Jihad center, and what was going on, the Charlie's War kind of thing, exposed everything. Now, ISI acted as that indispensable intermediary, and this granted it unprecedented leverage over regional dynamic and allowed it to play merry hell in the, peace of the larger, broader region. The second point, which I would like to dwell upon, is that Afghanistan's the ground for competition, not because of its own internal politics. If left alone, I am sure Afghanistan would not be a source of problem to the rest of the region. And they would, go around their own business and sort out their own things in the way they want to. But it's a ground for competition because of its geostrategic location, as also it's an indispensable bridge and has become one since the last centuries, let's say around 1940s, 50s. After that, since then, it's become an indispensable bridge between energy-rich North and the populous South. Now, you're well aware that Central Asia, the major energy hub, it's got massive reserves of oil and gas, and it needs reliable routes for exporting that energy. And those states, the Central Asian republics, also need routes, the same routes for importing other goods, because they are not industrially so well developed and they need a large amount of goods. In the past, that need was met from USSR, but the pattern has changed, consumption patterns have changed. China has stepped in to a large extent, but there are certain variety of goods which they need to import from other countries like India or Saudi Arabia or any other manufacturers in the broader region. And then we have this populous South, with the combined of Asia, energy-hungry consumers and manufacturers who want to export other goods to Central Asia republics. They want to get the energy from there and export this. And in between is this landlocked Afghanistan. It's a link between the Central Asian Republic, South Asia, the Middle East, China, and the Indian Ocean. Now, you are well aware that in the 2105, the United States Geological Survey had gone around on ground and done a massive survey in Afghanistan. And they said that there are trillions worth of mineral resources in 25 areas of interest in Afghanistan. And this includes some critical materials like rare earth. Now, add to this context the great power rivalries, the great power ambitions, for example, China's BRI, India's Middle East and Europe Economic Corridor, China's need to ensure that its Muslim-dominant Uyghur area of XUAR does not go down the same way, etc. and all that. Now, this is the reason that Afghanistan has become a ground for competition. The third point, which I would like to dwell upon, is how the decentralized Taliban intelligence outperformed the state-centric, tech-dominated Western intelligence construct. Given the budgets of the CIA and the MI6, everybody perhaps would have assumed that they had primacy and dominance in intelligence. But years of Cold War had led to the United States, having reliance or prioritizing reliance on tech-int as opposed to human, because it's very difficult to get behind the Iron Curtain in those days, especially in Russia or the USSR. Yet, the Western approach, therefore, was tech-dominated, centralized, and there were assumptions of gross superiority. There was very high dependence and over-reliance on SIGINT, ISR. ISR, as you're well aware, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, on drones, IMINT, ILINT, COMMENT, deception, etc. There's a failure to understand that tech-int complements human, but cannot substitute human. What a good observer can see and report back cannot be, what they call got by tech-int. Also, sensors cannot discern what we call in the intelligence that what is there in the human mind or between the ears of leaders. A typical example is what happened in Argentina. The British had bombed, those Falkland Islands airfield, Stanley Airfield. The Argentinians repaired it. And what they did was that every time the US satellite was to pass on top, they would build small rings of mud around the erstwhile craters. When the satellite would pass, it would see that so-called, mud things, heaps of mud, and think that those craters are still there. And the moment the satellite pass got over, the Argentinians would remove the mud and the fighter operations would begin. So this is a typical example of how you fool, satellite or tech and all. Now, the other point was that there was cultural and technological arrogance, which translated that if we have technical superiority, automatically we will get better intelligence. There was also no cognizing of the cultural intelligence, that cultural knowledge of a region is as important as technical capability. There were delays in the OODA loop due to poor decentralization. Most intelligence went up, then slowed down. Now, this thwarted quick, agile combat actions. The use of contractors for gathering intelligence was also there. Mirror image failure. Everybody in this force, they thought that the Taliban would fight as per Western politico-military methods and norms, in the same methods of fighting as the West fought. And there was predictive failure, unable to understand the Afghan psyche, the inability to predict the ANSS dynamics, collapse, and why it collapsed, that they came from the same stock. You can't be fighting the same people and having an army opposed to the same people from the same stock. It ignored local context, misunderstood tribal, social, and political dynamics of rural Afghanistan. And of course, there was this ineffective, absolutely corrupt Afghan government under Karzai, who thoughtlessly sought to implant, and even as the West thoughtlessly sought to implant Western systems in Afghanistan. The fourth point, which continues, is how the decentralized Taliban intelligence outperformed. The Taliban's approach was slightly different. They had a decentralized, human-centric system with immense motivation and which inspired fear. They had embedded networks. Taliban intelligence operates as a part of the local communities and are operating with high situational awareness of everything that was going on in the area of influence as also in the broader area of interest. They incorporated local communities. Their human was not a separate function, but was embedded in daily operations, enabling rapid adaptation to what was happening locally. Low-tech security in certain ways. There was face-to-face communication, difficult for the ISAF's high-tech surveillance to detect, yet they were able to use smartphone technology for propaganda, sending across their, ideas, fundraising, tracking, etc. Persistence of force. The Taliban lived in the same local environment permanently. The NATO troops or the ISAF troops kept rotating. They had a rotation of 3 months or 6 months. The old people went, the new guys came in, they took over, the documents and some briefings, and they started afresh. The Taliban, they were still there. The infiltration, I still remember when we met some people, there was this famous phrase. They said that the ISAF has the clock, but we have the time. So it was so profound when we talked to them that it is still stuck in my mind. It took me about a minute to understand that context. But when you think of it today, it was such a profound statement, that the ISAF has the clocks, we have the time. Then there was, of course, the infiltration and penetration of Taliban, which was deeply embedded even in the NSF, the role of fear, the corruption exploitation. The Taliban very rightly, exploited the corruption within the Afghan government against it. And there were cases of even the ISAF paying Taliban commanders for safe passage of convoys carrying ammunition and arms and food for them. So how are you going to fight this kind of a system? Next point that I would like to dwell upon is the possibility of intelligence security cooperation between India and Taliban 2.0. Now, this is my perception, and I hope I am right in this from my point of study. In Afghanistan, Pashtuns are the largest ethnic group. Some figures vary. The generalized figure is that they are roughly about 42 to 44% of the population are Pashtuns. Next are Tajiks at 27%, followed by Uzbeks at 9% and Hazaras also at 9%. Approximately 2/3 of Afghan Pashtuns belong to the Gilzai and Durrani confederations. The balance to the other smaller confederations. Historically, the Durranis have provided political leaders and the Gilzais the fighters. And almost all of Afghanistan's rulers have been from the Durrani tribe. Indians claim, we keep claiming that Afghans love India and Indians. Yet, when you talk to a certain segment of people, there is this sudden mistrust when you talk about the Taliban. You know, there is very little. Why I gave this context that the Taliban are largely Pashtun and Pashtuns are roughly half the population of Afghanistan. So how is it that you are saying that, you know, Afghans love you, but 50% of the population, nearly 50% of the population, you suspect them because they're called Taliban? You know, this is a kind of, you know, I would say oxymoron, which doesn't seem to, you know, the next point is that I found during my long tenure, no case of a major attack by Afghan Taliban on Indian interests. Please note, by the Afghan Taliban on Indian interests in Afghanistan. Now, insurgencies in India have maintained limited outreach to select Afghan Taliban leaders since, you know, almost 2004. Now, given the animosity of the Taliban and the Pashtuns and Pashtuns, etc., for Pakistan and its nefarious actions that Pakistan has been doing, there is good reason to suppose that there is immense potential for a mutually beneficial intelligence cooperation between India and the Taliban II government in Afghanistan. You know. And lastly, I would finish off by saying that what are the lessons for India and how should India prepare for proxy-enabled intelligence warfare? Now, the persistent hybrid war landscape is the new normal. You know, in social media, you keep having these debates that during the time of so-and-so, there were so many attacks, and now there are no attacks, whereas attacks continue. There is very little realization that such hybrid warfare or terrorism or sponsoring of terrorism or terrorist entrances or insurgency is not follow a political timeline. It is not that a certain leader comes in and everything vanishes and a certain leader goes away and some new leader comes in and it starts. You know, it has its own timeline and it dies a natural death as was defined in that RAND Corporation study on account of many things. You know, so it is not temporary, but hybrid warfare or proxy warfare is permanent, and a low-intensity conflict strategy is used by adversaries to bleed their opponents by avoiding direct war and its consequences. There is non-neutral and technology augmentation by the proxies who are now also using AI, cyber tools, drones, you know, advanced explosive, which require faster, more sophisticated intelligence, especially given the issues of self-radicalization, lone wolf, etc., and all that. Now, there is this intelligence paradigm of human versus techent. You know, technology is evolving at an exponential rate, advancing at an exponential rate. Yet, you know, while techent provides speed, scale, confirmation, but it can't interpret intent, or it can't tell you nuanced human behavior. It can't tell you what leaders are thinking, what's in their mind, what they plan to do, what the thought process is. Now, these are things which only human can provide. Human also cognizes cultural, social, and psychological factors, which are crucial for identifying sleeper cells. It is slow, it is high risk, and it is difficult to scale up. But that is why human is so important to build and to sustain. Now, what are the recommendations? The first recommendation is we must have an integrated intelligence architecture. That means the gap between RAW, IB, NTRO, DGMI, DAI, DNI, that is Director Naval Intelligence, Air Intelligence, and the local police. There should be an integrated platform of seamless sharing, which sets aside turf and the need to take credit for what has happened. Now, best information sometimes in such cases is often available at the local police level. It's often said that a person wanted to commit a terrorist crime or indulge in a very high scale of criminal activity usually starts with one small crime, like for example stealing of a car or a credit card fraud. So these are the issues which the local police is aware of. And if you connect those dots, sometimes instead of just sitting in, that glitzy room with screens and all that, it pays more dividends. There's also a need for civil military fusion with local police networks integrated across military intelligence and strategic intelligence at the district regional level. AI-enabled fusion, you are well aware of this. There's also a need to strengthen cognitive security, build AI-driven tools to combat disinformation, protect against psychological warfare, and secure national narratives. Invest in indigenous technology, because every bit of equipment or a cyber tool that we export from abroad is likely to be tainted and have a backdoor. So therefore, we need to invest in indigenous technologies. Most important, you can do all this and yet fail. Most important, there's a need to induct wise, erudite, very mature personnel with education and knowledge in multiple domains. Today, intelligence is not just about, wo ek bum phodne wala hai. It is spreading across multi-domains. I would not like to boast, but I spent 10 years in the Joint Intelligence Committee heading the defense segment. Where did I succeed? Because I was actually a technologist, who had specialized at the DIA in, intelligence. So I used to apply, methodologies. Something came about submarine, we would tell them this is not possible. This is a lie. Have you had a look at this? This is how this thing. Give you an example. Somebody came and told us that at some place, no names taken, that some person who had come with human had reported missiles being deployed 15 kilometers across a border. So we asked him that 15 kilometers across the border, and there was a huge hue and cry. So my view was that firstly, let's ask him what did he see. Actually, what he saw was massive water pipes being transported for a water and sewage network. And he assumed those massive black pipes on the backs of trucks were missiles. Now, I was asked that on what basis did you make this comment? So my comment was that nobody deploys strategic missiles 15 kilometers away from the border, which is within the reach of your own artillery. So you need to keep that away, strategic missiles. You don't put it over there. So what I'm trying to say is you need people with knowledge in multiple domains and not only in police level intelligence. And even then you will fail if you do not have people with utmost professional honesty and integrity. There's a need to say it as it is and go by that adage that my assessment may or may not drive your policy, but I am not going to let your political philosophy or ideology drive my assessment and then give it back to you. So I will have professional honesty and integrity. So that is the sixth point, and with that, I end.
Thank you for an excellent presentation on a very important topic, sir. I'm grateful to this presentation as it will help me on my research. I look forward to hear from you on the question and answer session. So thank you, sir. Next, we have my Afghan counterparts, Sangar Paikar, to speak on this very important topic, Pakistan airstrike in Kabul, clashes on Durand Line, the future of Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict. So over to you, Sangar.
Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation of Mr. Kuldeep Singh. Just to give you a quick overview, I will be discussing the airstrikes that have caused the ongoing all-out war as declared by the defense minister of Pakistan, Khwaja Asif. These airstrikes happened in late February, and this is an event that is considered out of the ordinary, but I want you to look back at what we experienced in the last two decades. First of all, after U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, when the Taliban were pushed into the Pakistani tribal areas, the tribes in western parts of Pakistan, the Pashtunkhwa communities, they provided shelter to the Taliban due to their ethnic, cultural, religious, and historic ties with Afghanistan. However, what is very important to note is that the Americans during the first Bush administration and the government of Parvez Musharraf, they realized that the Taliban being sheltered in those regions provided them a sanctuary, and they could initiate attacks from those tribal areas into Afghanistan, and that they could orchestrate their insurgency. And when that process started, the Musharraf government and the Bush administration basically organized a campaign to prevent the tribal communities in Pakistan from sheltering the Taliban. And those operations right after 2002, 2003 were the initial phase where the militant groups in Pakistan were targeted by Pakistani military, and that gave birth to what we currently know as the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Because historically, the tribes in Pakistan, the traditional conservative communities, they were always seen as very patriotic. Whenever there was a conflict between India and Pakistan, these people were the first ones to go and fight on the front line and sacrifice their lives for Pakistan. However, the Soviet occupation and the subsequent crisis in Afghanistan changed the whole dynamic. And suddenly, these very favored communities in Pashtunkhwa were no longer seen as the heroic communities that they can always praise for their courage. No, now they became the enemies. And the Pakistani military conducted several operations against those people, which drove them into Afghanistan. And once they were driven into Afghanistan and they fled to Kunar, to Nuristan, Nangarhar, to Khost, Paktia, and Paktika, what happened is that suddenly on Afghan side of the Durand Line, there were communities of refugees and also militant groups originating from Pakistan. And in 2011, 2012, in that period, we also noticed a process where the Pakistani military would shell Afghan side of the Durand Line. They would use heavy weaponry to target villages that they allege are hosting the TTP. But since Afghanistan did not enjoy sovereignty and the regime in Kabul did not have the capability to defend itself, they would just allow that to happen. There were some protests and some statements against Pakistan. There were condemnations, but Afghanistan was not able to prevent Pakistan from violating its sovereignty and attacking its soil. And neither did the Americans take any actions against Pakistan. But since 2021, we have a government that wants to identify itself first and foremost as a sovereign government that is entirely independent and a representation of the Afghan nation. And this is why they will, under no circumstance, accept any violation of Afghan sovereignty by neighbors. So when the Pakistanis try to target Afghanistan repeatedly on the pretext of trying to eradicate training camps of the TTP, the current government, despite their limitations, despite their lack of resources and weapons, they basically were pushed into a response initially earlier in 2025 and now again in the last few days. Afghanistan does not have the air defense capabilities to prevent Pakistani airstrikes. They do not have any capabilities to prevent all the other advanced weapons that Pakistan has. But basically, they are fighting currently against Pakistan based on the principle that they have to respond to any violation of Afghan sovereignty, while they know that they simply do not have the capability to prevent Pakistan at this moment. Now, what does this mean for regional dynamic? First and foremost, Afghanistan as a nation state has experienced 5 decades of unrest. And before these 5 decades of unrest, there were some factors that contributed to the emergence of the unrest. For example, to give you a very vivid example, I am from rural Kabul, and traditionally we have lived in rural Kabul. My ancestors have lived there for a very long time. But once we experienced a shortage of water for irrigation, my family was forced to move to the city because they could not longer sustain themselves in rural communities. But before, when there was sufficient water for irrigation, my family would produce fruit, and that fruit was exported to India. So sorry, I forgot how to say that in English. Basically, Muhasib, the accountant of my grandfather, was an Afghan Sikh. And he was not just doing the accounting, but he was also arranging for export of some of the goods that our family and our communities would produce, and it was being sent to India. And this disturbance of economy and livelihood of people due to climate change and other factors has also contributed to the instability in Afghanistan that later was more or less seen as a contribution to instability in the region. However, now, after 5 decades of conflict, the current government in Afghanistan, despite its all shortcomings, has an agenda of returning back to a utopian state that no longer exists. Earlier during this conference, I also explained that the Afghan rural and traditional society has been thoroughly eradicated due to the conflict. So returning back to what Afghanistan used to be is a utopia. That society no longer exists, so we are chasing a mirage, essentially. But despite the fact that this is more or less a mirage, the current government's attempts to bring stability, number one, security, number two, establishing economic and trade ties with the region, and number three, kickstarting an industry in Afghanistan. Those factors are contributing to a moderate level of, how I would say, a moderate level of return to stability. However, the airstrikes and the tensions with Pakistan is not just preventing that return to stability, but it's also seriously undermining the whole notion of what Afghanistan's potential is in the region. So if Pakistan feels the need to engage Afghanistan in a open conflict, they have their reasons and they have their motivations for that. But at the same time, it is also a matter that may, in short term, not just destabilize Afghanistan, Pakistan, but also the entire region. Because earlier in the conference, some of the esteemed experts have so eloquently stated that we have a emergence of a new consensus in Central Asia and to an extent in South Asia, that this part of the world can be the next center of economic growth and prosperity. This part of the world has the resources, the human capital to play a major role in what is to come in near the future, in decades to come. But in order to do that, we need a will, that a general will of the nation states of the region that believes in that vision, that we are capable of bringing about long-term stability and prosperity in the region that will benefit all of us. And as Afghanistan, as a country that basically connects South Asia, Central Asia, and Middle East with each other, we can play a key role in this effort. But in order to achieve that, we have to also have a regional consensus on how to deal with our biggest neighbor, Pakistan. Because if Pakistan does not share that vision of Central Asia, South Asia, and Middle East, if they have a different vision of what they want to achieve, then it doesn't simply affect Afghanistan. It also affects the 5 Central Asian republics. It's, I think I'm late with my speech because Iran is currently being bombed, but it also affects Iran. And since we are talking about Afghanistan and Indian security, it will have its negative implications for India as well. So this is why I think that addressing the current conflict in Afghanistan with Pakistan is in the interest of not just India, but also the Central Asian republics. We need to strive towards a coherent regional vision on what we want to achieve as a collective. Do we want to stay in this mindset of being very petty and constantly at each other's throats? Or are we going to look at a future where we can be the center of economic development, prosperity, and future of the world as what we want to see in the future for ourselves, but also for our neighbors? And that shared vision is currently lacking. That shared vision is stated to a certain extent, but it's not very explicitly stated, and there is also no consensus on that matter. And this is why the conflict between the conflict between Afghanistan and Pakistan is seen as a regional issue between two countries, but I think it's far more than that. And I would say that considering what we right now, what we see in our timelines of what is happening in Afghanistan and Iran, we can also conclude that these flames of conflict will not limit themselves just to one country. They will sooner or later also affect our other neighbors. And the sooner we realize that, the better. And my concluding remark is that I hope that our neighbors, our partners, that they take decisive actions on this matter. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Sangar, for this very important account of this conflict and how it is going to shape regional security. And the recent comment of Khwaja Asif calling us Afghans the proxy of India is irony and laughable. Pakistan itself is a proxy of which our country is willing to hire them for their dirty work. A great example is Khwaja Asif's acknowledging doing the dirty work for the US and the West. So the fight against GHQ and Rawalpindi terrorism require an unified Afghan response from us. So thank you again, Mr. Sangar. I'm looking forward to hear your views on question and answer session. Next, we have Ambassador Mr. Ammar Sina, who is well-known expert in Afghanistan. Sir is going to speak on Delhi-Kabul Security Cooperation. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to the Indic Researchers Foundation for getting me here. And of course, it was absolutely delighted to hear some very, very erudite and learned professionals who spoke. Two of them are here, Mr. Sandhu, Brigadier Kuldeep Singh, right? Oh. And of course, Mr. Paikar. You see, it is often, and most analysts outside of this region talk about South Asia as the most dangerous neighborhood. And this is a trope that you hear very often. But that is the tragedy that I think India and Afghanistan face together. It is not really the bad neighborhood, but we both share a bad neighbor. I say that because that is going to be the premise of what I say further. It's one bad neighbor, which was created fairly recently in 1947. It got interposed between India and Afghanistan, and it has become a thorn on both sides. This is a gift that the British left for us and the region in 47. And of course, when we are talking of conflicts, so a lot of conflict finds sort of its drivers in the history itself of this region, of the nation states, how the nation states were created, and also then the state policies, how the states have followed different policies and how they have looked at the issues. So that covers your entire topic of covert dynamics, security in Afghanistan or insecurity. But from India's perspective, and I'll just give you pointers because all of you are into research, we have heard the background, the drivers, the drug economy which fuels it, the intelligence networks, cooperation, the requirements that we need. So we have to look at the threats both in terms of what comes from states, but also in our region also comes from non-state actors, which again are driven by the drug and the conflict economies that we have here. In this, it is very interesting that Pakistani minister actually, when they started the bombing, they said that this is an open war. Perhaps it was a confession that first time Pakistani military is actually doing an open war rather than a covert or a proxy war that they are so expert in. So I found that use of the word open war quite funny, and perhaps it was a Freudian slip on their part. You see, the world started looking at terror, or when Bush announced this global war on terror after 9/11. But this was an old story for us. We have been perhaps one of the oldest victims of terror, and not only terrors emanating from ideologies, but actually terror that was sponsored by a state, where a state used terror as a policy. And that was a unique feature of this region. And that is what has affected both India and also it's affecting Afghanistan in many ways. So this use of terrorism or brainwashing people to believe that they are actually fighting a religious war has been an old policy, which of course it of course started with the Cold War, but the British were past masters and they had used the same tribals and the same religious sort of inclinations to trouble Kabul even before, when they were here as Britishers. So this was, I think, a British legacy which went down to the Americans and then which was adopted by Pakistan as the inheritor of the British legacy. So they continued with this policy, and rather successfully. And of course, we have seen it that since 79, it has actually changed the entire complexion of the region and the nature and the type of the society that Afghanistan is. And the good thing is that people who know Afghanistan, that in the early 60s, soon after our independence, Afghanistan perhaps was the most progressive state in our region, including having an air force which was bigger and more and better equipped than both India and Pakistan in 50s and 60s. This was the background, and what you see today, what Pakistan is doing with great impunity, bombing, because it had made sure that when the Afghan security forces were rebuilt by NATO and ISAF, one of the conditions that the Pakistanis had imposed was there should be no air wing. And that Pakistani sensitivity was taken on board, and Afghan security forces did not have any offensive weapons, at least aerial weapons, till India actually came up and gave the first Mi-17s and 4 combat helicopters in 2015. And that also took us nearly 20 years of decision, 15 years of decision making because of sensitivities of the West and Pakistan. And it had inhibited the mobility and the capabilities of the Afghan security forces in defending themselves. And of course, mismanagement, corruption, and also that was there. But the difference I see between Taliban 1 and Taliban 2 was that Taliban 1 was seen as a complete 100% proxy of Pakistan, fighting other Afghans only. But the Taliban 2 sort of reframed or repositioned itself as a nationalist force fighting foreign occupiers in Afghanistan. And that is why they had much greater level of acceptance in the Afghan society. And actually in 1920-21, it became so easy for them to overturn a military which was fairly well-trained, stronger, maybe well-resourced, though with diminished international support. But of course demoralized because of the policies, internal dynamics within Afghanistan. That besides the point. So all that I'm just telling you to give you a background that how we look at Afghanistan. Of course, our relationship goes beyond security. There are various other aspects, but since this afternoon we are discussing security cooperation, so we have been guided by this basic principle. And somebody made a question whether India has resiled from its value-based policies and accepted Taliban, etc. And somebody did explain what exactly is value and how you look at it. But I think the basic driving value should be that our policies should be oriented towards the people of Afghanistan, not particularly regimes in Afghanistan. And if you see, there is not a fundamental change, except that it is a religious, ideologically driven government. But otherwise, it is a continuation of our policy that India has always stood behind the regime or the government in Kabul, whatever be its nature, except with the exception of the first Taliban regime, 1996 to 2001, when they did not have an embassy. Otherwise, we always supported the monarchies or even the communist governments or Ravani government, whatever was the government there, we had decided that we will deal with those because ultimately we have to keep up this because connection with India and Afghanistan was very critical. I don't think it is that critical for India, but from Afghanistan's perspective, that relationship is very, very important. Not only for security or for balancing or geopolitics, but I think economically, if you look traditionally at their trade basket or their exports, entire economy was completely enmeshed with India. 80% of their exports went to India, undivided India, and then of course over 50% even till 2011. I think 2011, 12, 50% or more of their exports, which is fresh fruits and vegetables, came to India, and it was a huge market for India. Besides that people here came for education, for health, and all sorts of services that which they could not get. Now, all that changed because Pakistan kept changing its policies, made it difficult for goods to transit, overflights kept getting disrupted. So because they knew that that link they had to break if they wanted India's influence reduced. But from the security perspective, our prime driver is denying Pakistan that strategic space in Afghanistan, which of course in military terms, which are they call strategic depth, which I don't think is a very valid military doctrine really. You can't have strategic depth behind your borders because it is obviously its starting point. It is a defeatist mentality that you want a fallback area when you are under pressure or under defeat by the advancing Indian military. So I don't think it's a valid military doctrine, but basically what it was a code word for that what you had talked about, a gray zone deniability. Because our experience showed that each time either us or the world asked Pakistan to control the Pakistan-based terror organizations, they would put their hands up and say that we can't do anything, they are all operating out of Afghanistan. So it suited Pakistan to have areas in Pakistan which were not governed by the center or ungoverned space, which were really the gray zones across Durand Line, where they could then shift some of the training camps of the LET and Lashkar, etc., as we saw in Taliban 1-0. The second concern, which was not so much now, but at least in 1996, etc., was because of this global jihad that had been organized, Afghanistan had become, and this entire FATA and Trans-Durand area had become really terror central for the world, right from Osama bin Laden to you just name anybody and everybody was there from the terror world. And they had all interlinked with Jaish Muhammad. They were funding all this, and that organization, Al-Qaeda, had extraterritorial ambitions, which today the Taliban doesn't have. So we have that concern, but we still have concerns about the presence of Islamic State, which made its appearance first time in 2014 or 2015. I was still there. And that in rather sort of suspicious conditions, because the intelligence that was shared with us by our interlocutors was that most of them actually were drawn from a particular Pakistani tribe, the Orakzai tribe, and many of them who were caught or who had surrendered or got killed did carry Pakistani military numbers stitched into their salwars. So obviously what they had done really was to create a nucleus of fighters who could ostensibly challenge Taliban, but become a nucleus to attract more youth. Because, that is the best advertising that you can do for recruiting in terror, that you do some spectacular attacks, and that becomes the selling point. And then the offers of monthly payments that was being made to them was at least 2 times what the Afghan military chaps were getting. So obviously it became a huge bait for unemployed youth looking for both the excitement of so-called jihad, but more importantly, to get gainful employment. Then, of course, elements from Syria and various other countries started trickling in and joined. But obviously, they were not coming to Syria via Iran or Afghanistan. They were obviously being routed from somewhere. Our own assessment at that point was that this was the phase 3 of jihad that Pakistan was creating in Afghanistan to keep whatever government comes in power in Kabul in 2021, because by then 2015, 2016, it was fairly clear that the end game of the Americans and withdrawal, etc., or some sort of a reconciliation is going to happen. And I think that a force was getting created, which would then be used as Pakistani proxy to put pressure on Kabul. I don't know whether that has succeeded, because Taliban has, in the last 2 years, been very, very effectively eliminating all the ISKP guys. And they have also, I think, isolated most of the Central Asian-based terror groups, which were moved out of once Pakistan started that operation, very famous, what was called Zarb-e-Azb or something, in 2012, 2013, in Fatah region, against TTP, but they also targeted some of these other terror groups, which had Uyghurs, Tajiks, Uzbeks, and they were shifted into Afghan territories then, which were controlled by Taliban. And I understand that under this regime, the Taliban has moved them away from the border into deeper areas. Obviously, they have not forced them to leave because of old loyalties or whatever, but they have made sure that they don't pose a threat to the neighboring countries and operate very close to their borders. So that we are, I think, there is a certain amount of understanding that we have developed with them, because we realize that that unless you cooperate with the intelligence agencies of earlier NDS under the Republican government, and today I think it's called GDI or something, you will not be able to share your assessments and also obtain their assessment on what exactly is happening on the ground, because they have assured the government that if we give them credible evidence, they would be very happy to act against anybody who is or represents or is part of a group which is anti-India. And that is perhaps the basis of this cooperation or this slight opening up that you have seen with Taliban. So I don't think it is, so it is both, to answer that earlier question, it is both a bit of realism, but also a bit of continuation and self-interest, that what is it that is in your security interest. I've talked about it. The other threat that I feel and which could remain permanent, besides the ideological sort of melting pot that was created, but I could now sense that Taliban is, of course, there is a core group in the Taliban leadership which is extremely ideological and is very regressive in terms of the interpretation of Islam, and you see the results in terms of denial of rights to women, education, etc. But the large majority favors opening up and normalizing and trying to become a normal government, because otherwise they also understand that this is not a sustainable model, which is so exclusive and so ethnocentric that it is only Pashtuns from a particular region. So, and Afghanistan is a very diverse society. As you had quoted those numbers, 42 or 44%. It could be more because a lot of Pashtuns also are divided across the Durand line. But the interesting fact, which many would not know, that India has perhaps over 50 million people of Pashtun ethnicity. And this is over history, that, you know, the flow of ebb and flow of people. And this was a figure quoted to me by President Karzai, none else. He says, actually, India is the biggest Pashtun country in terms of, you look at both Muslim and Hindu Pashtuns. Actually, Rajasthan has also tribes which are Pashtuns, but which are Hindu. And I have met some of them in Kabul. So, but the one point that post-withdrawal, I think a new threat, and that threat was of the very advanced American weapons which were left behind, which had sniper rifles, night vision equipment, and various other things, which of course has all been taken over by Taliban. But our concern really is that each one, is it really accounted for? There is no transfer of this happening to other groups, whether I don't think they would officially transfer it, but there could be individuals who may be tempted to sell it in the gray zone. And the fact is that there is a very active, both a manufacturing power in our region, which can replicate anything very easily. Besides, even in Pakistan, the ripoffs of AK-47 and all the pistols of the world you can get for 1/10 of the price. So even if one or two gets sneaked out, then they can be replicated, and it can actually pose a long-term recurring threat to us in terms of the upgradation of the equipments available to the guys who come across into India. So these are the, I think, very practical and considerations that we have to look into. Of course, we have to engage with the government and I think use our substantial influence because you see, at one point, India had a huge perceptional advantage in Afghanistan, because of whatever reason. I think the soft power, the old history, that we most have, if you ever asked, that who was the biggest donor? While you hear of trillions of dollars spent by Americans, but most common Afghan will tell you it's India. Though I don't think our budget per annum was much greater than many of the smaller European countries. Perhaps Sweden spent equal amount of money as us. But what we did was completely need-based, based on the demands and requests from the village and the local panchayats or jirgas. And it actually directly affected the people, whether it was transmission lines or road connectivity or water supplies or simple things. So it had a huge impact. And since we're doing it on ourselves, it was real value for money. That, to give you an example, which is again, and I'm quoting Afghan president here, President Ghani, he used to publicly say that India has built our Zaranj Dilaram road at $500,000 per kilometer, which the Americans are spending over $3 million per kilometer on their Kandahar road. So that was the level of difference. And of course, we never used to do multiple levels of subcontracting, which added to the cost. We used local resources, local contractors, and gave employment to local workers rather than bringing thousands of workers from India. And that, I think, created deep stakes in the society in what we were doing, and it was directly going to the people. So these are policies that we will have to continue. Of course, there is still, as somebody mentioned, that we still are, a certain segment in India is looking at it purely from a security prism, and they carry a certain amount of distrust of Taliban. Perhaps rightly so, because when you argue with them, all of them are beholden to Pakistan, which is true. But even the Mujahideen were beholden to Pakistan. They had lived in Pakistan just like Taliban, but fought. Because you see, an Afghan in a refugee camp is very different from an Afghan in Kabul and in power. Then he wants to be an independent, sovereign, and not to be seen as a lackey of any power. And that is where I wish our Pakistani friends good luck, because they have really walked into what has been known as the graveyard of empires. So despite all their gloating and boasting, I think they have not taken the right lessons from history. And of course, the challenge of drug, Mr. Sandhu has very well covered. That is a growing concern for us, because drugs, even if it's not a state policy, it's a huge multiplier in the sense that it's like an investment. If you have $30, you see, when we were in Tajikistan, the assessment was that each time the consignment of drugs crossed any border, land border, the prices used to double. It practically doubles. So basically, a production of, say, $300 million worth of heroin or opium in Afghanistan, by the time it reaches the market, it fetches you over $3 billion. And yes, and you were very hesitant in saying that diplomats were caught smuggling. But let me tell you that I have also known diplomats who have abused the diplomatic immunity, and there should be no hesitation in naming and shaming them. And the Russians were both a consumer, but also a huge transit point that, as was Tajikistan. In fact, Tajikistan, it was well known in the society that they were the richest people, the ones who had a finger in the trade in terms of just facilitating the crossing of the Tajik territory from Afghanistan into Uzbeks or Kyrgyzstan onwards to Russia. And of course, then the Russia-Europe route was open. So Russia was both a transit country. I don't know whether it has changed today. But yes, and it's exactly like India, that we are both a transit as well as a consumer country. And unfortunately, the consumer part is getting more prominent, which is dangerous and destabilizing for ourselves. So I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to answer. And of course, unfortunately, now this Iranian action may again put Afghanistan back on the footnotes of history books, because Mr. Trump has started it's called the Operation Epic Fury, and he has launched it just now. But the Taliban to Afghanistan is also a gift from President Trump, to a very large extent. I was there when we did the negotiations, and of course, Biden did the final withdrawal. But that entire Doha agreement and the entire framework which was created, which made the Afghan government unsustainable, was done by Mr. Trump and his team. So thank you very much, and thank you to all of you. I'm talking to you here.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable presentation, and your years of experience with Afghanistan has definitely enriched this discussion. With the roadmap to regional stability and peace go through Delhi and Kabul partnership. So again, thank you very much, sir. With this, we have to come to an end with the discussion. So now I would request our session host Mitali to help with the question and answer session. So over to you, Mitali.
Thank you, Ms. Bayankhail, but we will be skipping Q&A session because we have to then transition to a next session. I think Brigadier Kuldeep Singh sir has to say something.
Sir, you're muted.
Yes, sir, you're muted.
Okay, I had just 4 points. One is that the very rightly that was brought out about Pakistan insisting to the ISAF not to raise an air wing, and Pakistan's strategic space. You see, the strategic space is not about going into Afghanistan, but the fact was that the entire Pakistan military, or the 3 wings of the Pakistan military and the Frontier Corps, were only orientated for India, except for Frontier Corps. They did not have the capacity for two-front warfare. So what they were wanting is all along that there should be an absolutely friendly Pakistan and a strategic space over there. Even if Pakistan was neutral, they would have to raise extra ground formations and air force, which meant that an economic burden which they could not afford. So that was one. The second was that the US, actually, one of the basic problems of the US is they have attacked Iran today, along with Israel, that they want everybody, they are a hegemonistic power, and they want to attack people, and after attacking, they want that those people should fight the way we are. If we are using F-35, then you also bring some kind of aircraft. If we are having an aircraft carrier, you also bring this thing. Like very rightly, if you recall, our own chief, General Malik, had said during the Kargil war, we will fight with what we have and the way we have been trained. Now, the Afghans did not have, an air force or a Marine Corps or this thing. So they fought the way they are. But the American narrative is such that the moment you start fighting in Iraq or anywhere against them, in a way which does not suit them, then you are a terrorist. So that is another point. The third.
Sir, you are again muted.
Okay, so my own perception, third point is that, after the DIA, National Security Council for 10 years, then later on MHA, that the Taliban one perhaps was not really a proxy of Pakistan, but were at the mercy of Pakistan. After the Battle of Tora Bora, Shahkot Valley, etc., and all that, and the bombing which went on, they escaped into, FATA, North Waziristan, South Waziristan, Bajaur, and all these places. And I think the classic example of this emblematic stuff is that, if you recall, Mullah Omar died in 2013. The Pakistanis kept his death hidden till 2017 almost. They did not want people to know that he had died, so that the hold that they had over the Quetta Shura was thing. Now, the moment the Americans went away in 2021, the moment they went away, everybody migrated back, and now they are no longer kind to the Pakistanis. So I think they were more at the mercy of Pakistan than anything else. And last point was that if you read the IGAR report, which was published after the withdrawal of the US from Afghanistan, 60% of funds of the US used to go back to US people, US companies, consultants sitting in the US or here, or the companies. Only 40% used to be deployed, out of which the contractors would take their cut. So if the contractor took 20% cut, so out of 1 billion, what you had as spending was of about 200 billion. 80 billion was just incidental charges. And a couple of billion are still unaccounted for. They don't even know where that money went. So, of course, so that's the reason I feel proud as an Indian. If you look at the road, if you look at the dam, the kind of things that we have done, absolutely wonderful over there. Thank you.
Yes, speaker, sir. Over to you.
If I may, I just heard Mr. Kuldeep Singh say something that I think is also relevant to the discussion. In 2007, when the initial contact was made between Mullah Omar's office and the Americans, the suggestion was that negotiations should be held between the Taliban and the Americans in Saudi Arabia, and that there was even a suggestion that an office needs to be established in Pakistan or in Saudi Arabia to facilitate negotiation between the Taliban and the Americans, because they realized that sooner or later they have to leave Afghanistan. Based on my studies and discussions with the current authorities in Afghanistan, the senior leadership insisted on having their office and representation anywhere outside Pakistan. They, under no condition would they accept any kind of office or representation in Pakistan, because they feared that that would undermine them in their effort to find any kind of resolution with the Americans. So this perfectly aligns with what Mr. Kuldeep Singh was saying, is that they were at the mercy of Pakistan, and they couldn't wait getting out of that situation. Thank you.
No, that of course, this Taliban I know, and in fact, in 2011, when the Qatar office was opened, you'd also remember that Mullah Baradar was in jail because his only crime was that he has done outreach to Afghanistan outside of Pakistani's tutelage. And that was reason enough for him to be in jail incommunicado for close to 7 years. He was released only when the Americans started the Doha negotiations to lead those negotiations. So yes, that was absolutely very clear to us that Pakistan didn't want any reconciliation in Afghanistan where they were not the party. If you remember, in 2015, there was also, it was in 2015 when the first attempt of it was called a trilateral. It was US, China, Pakistan, and Taliban. They had started this dialogue. And that is when, after the first two rounds, where they kept bringing in messages on behalf of Mullah Omar, that the NDS in Afghanistan got the news that Mullah Omar has been dead since 2011. So that is when those talks broke down, because they were, I don't know whether they were even fooling the Chinese, but definitely the Americans, maybe the Chinese were privy to that information. But that was the level of deception that they were playing. And you are right, strategic depth, they wanted a neutral, in a sense, subservient Afghanistan. And in fact, they used this argument very nicely with the Americans, because who would basically tell them to seal the borders because they were facing this cross-border movement of people. And their basic argument was, oh, we don't have people because, there is belligerent India sitting in our east, so we cannot relocate our troops from our border, as if we were threatening them at any point of time. And but yes, they used it. They milked Americans because they said that they're short of resources, and they got $30 billion of coalition support funds over those 20 years. So,
Thank you so much, sir. I would now like to ask the speakers if they have anything else to add.
Okay, so may I take it, Mitali? Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That way, if I think after Ambassador Amar Sinha and Sangar Paekhar and Brigadier Kuldeep Singh spoke, there should be nothing on the intelligence and other things. Of course, I would have loved to speak on those, but I was given the narcotic side, so I took it. Pakistan has, we cannot segregate what happened after the first Soviet withdrawal, because the whole chain is linked. In the whole world, when we see the global terrorism scene, when USSR was withdrawing, the then Foreign Minister Edward Shevardnadze had written a letter to Americans: we are withdrawing in the next 6 months. That was a 6 month period, 78 to 79. And that once we leave, there will be a power vacuum. So please arrange internationally to do something. Obviously, their target was to get the USSR out. They did nothing. And the moment they left, on the way, many of them were killed. I have seen some of those mutilated people, those who were, while they were going through, and the whole thing split into 7 people. Somewhere is Gulbuddin, Hekmatyar, somewhere is Dostan, and all. I don't want to go to all the 7. And then those people who were left there, you call them fighters, terrorists, mujahids, any word you like, they were there. So they went to Peshawar. No, that became a burden on Pakistan, what to do with those people. When we raided the house of the president of Bosnia, we got some evidence on that those fighters were then transported to the Balkans region. And we have even a special flight when President visited Lahore, he was given a letter, signed letter. I have a copy of that, cannot share obviously. So that one, then they moved to Bosnia. They fought there, so many beheadings. I had the chance to investigate in Bosnia, some of them, talk to some of those people. But when after Dayton Agreement, peace started coming there, because obviously then they were, so where do they go? Then they spread to all over. Many of them landed in Iraq. I have traced during the years some of those people. We were working on that. In fact, one of my friends, that Daniel Pearl, got killed in our neighboring country, we know. 1 week before his going there, he had talked to me in New York. We had planned that when he comes back, what he was going to get. So it is a whole thing is complicated. To put the story in one, like cut the story short, everything started from there, and all over the world, we are still facing the impact of that. And their role, our neighbors' role, is everywhere throughout this whole scene. I think that I will leave with that. And of course, Sangar Paekhar also is country. I happened to go to Afghanistan few times, Kabul, Kandahar, and also went to Mazar-e-Sharif and Iraq, South Sudan. In fact, 106 countries I traveled during my work all over the years. That includes every major conflict region of the world, from Somalia to Sierra Leone to everywhere, South Sudan, more than 20 times, so everywhere. So I think everything gets linked somehow to that region. I rest my case with that. Thank you very much.
And you're right, and reminded me by talking about the Peshawar 7. You reminded me that, I had said that Pakistan inherited number of policies. One of the policy it inherited also was divided rule. So the front which was fighting the Soviets also had to be split up into 6 different groups, then also divided on the basis of ethnicities, so that this conflict could then become an internal issue within Afghanistan. But that reminds me of a very interesting anecdote, 79, because we used to train a lot of Afghan military officers. And there was this group which had gone back from INA. There were 10 or 12 of them. By then, the Soviets had come, so they could reach Pakistan, but they could not obviously enter Afghanistan. So these were the guys who were bilingual because they had learned Hindi and English, and they could communicate with the Pakistanis, and they had learned English. So what Pakistan did, that offered them, there are these groups of mujahideens. Why don't you all work with them for your nation? You have all just come back from military training. And they all agreed. This was a service for the nation. So they got divided into different groups. And they are still there. And that is how Mr. Stanekzai was part of the Taliban, because he had joined that group, which eventually evolved into Taliban. And then there were others with who were governors in Kapisa and various other places. So we had a group of over 20 senior IMA officers from different political factions, including in the Taliban. So it reminded me of this nice anecdote. And we used to, our military attaché, etc., we used to annually actually keep meeting them. We couldn't meet Mr. Stanekzai because he was in Pakistan and Qatar. Otherwise, but then I got an opportunity to meet him later. Good. So thank you very much. I think we have already, the next session is, the speakers are waiting.
I see. Ambassador Sri Kumar Menon and Ambassador Anil Trigunait also showed his.
Yeah, Ambassador Trigunait was also there. I saw him.
Yeah. So nice. I think it was pleasure. Sorry, go ahead, Minali.
Sorry, sir. Yeah, I would now like to invite Ms. Bayankhail to give the concluding remarks.
Yeah, with this we have come to the end of the discussion, and I'm thankful to all the speakers for their excellent representation. Personally, this session has helped me immensely as researcher of security study. And I'm sure the audience would equally have been enriched by this insightful discussion. With this, I conclude the session, and hoping to continue with the India-Afghanistan dialogue with a structured roadmap for future collaboration between our countries. So thank you, and over to you, Mitali.
Thank you so much, Ms. Levsa. Thank you so much to all the speakers. It was really nice to hear to all of you. And thank you so much for making it engaging and insightful, especially at the time when we Indian gets more sleepy. And we are also pleasure to know that we also created a platform for all old friends to come together and have discussions among yourselves. But due to time restraints, we were not able to take up a few questions. However, we would like to organize more such sessions in the future. Thank you so much to all speakers. Thank you so much for the audience for keeping such good engagement. And thank you so much to you, Ms. Bayankhail. Please stay tuned for the next session.